haven't slept properly in 3 months. Not since that February night in West Virginia when I learned that some things in the mountains don't want to be found, but they'll damn sure find you. I was a wildlife photographer then, chasing the perfect shot of a bobcat den someone had reported near Smoke Hole Canyon. It was supposed to be a 2-day trip. I've been trying to leave those mountains behind ever since. Before we begin, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like the video and share it with your close friends and family. I would also love to hear where you are listening from. Thank you all for the support. It truly means a lot to me. Now, let's start. The forecast had promised clear skies, but by the time I reached the trailhead, a fog bank had settled across the canyon like something alive, something breathing. My GPS flickered twice and died. No signal. Nothing unusual for these parts, I told myself. I've done this 100 times. I checked my compass, shouldered my pack, and started the descent into the canyon as the sun began its slow surrender to the tree line. The trail disappeared faster than it should have. Not gradually, the way paths sometimes do, but all at once, as if the mountain had swallowed it whole. I found myself pushing through undergrowth that looked untouched by human passage. Rhododendron thickets so dense they blocked out what little light remained. That's when I started feeling it, that pressure between my shoulder blades, that ancient instinct that turns your spine to ice and whispers that you're being watched. I stopped and turned, scanning the fog. Nothing, just gray mist threading through. Bare black branches and the profound silence that comes when even the birds know to shut the hell up. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. I heard it then, cutting through the quiet like a blade through silk. A sound that made my blood crystallize in my veins. Humming high-pitched, tuneless, like a child who doesn't quite understand how music works. It was coming from somewhere above me, up the ridge. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, but I'm a photographer, and photographers are fundamentally stupid when it comes to danger. We chase it, document it. So I climbed toward that sound, my camera ready, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The humming stopped just as I reached a small clearing. In the center stood a pile of stones, stacked with impossible precision, each one balanced perfectly on the one below. Around it, scattered in the dead leaves, were bones, figure, impossibly tall and impossibly thin, watching me from between 2 trees maybe 30 yards away. It was naked, its skin the color of dirty snow, and its face, God, its face was wrong. The eyes were too far apart, the mouth too wide, and when it smiled at me, I saw teeth that looked like they'd been filed down 2 points. I ran. I don't remember dropping my camera or tearing through the rhododendrons so fast the branches left bloody scratches across my face. I just remember running, sliding down the mountain in the dark, the humming following me, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes to my left, sometimes so close I could feel breath on my neck that smelled like rot and old meat. I ran until my lungs were on fire, until my legs gave out, until I collapsed on a Forest Service road and lay there sobbing in the dirt. A ranger found me at dawn. I tried to tell him what I'd seen, but the words came out jumbled and insane. He drove me to my car, and I noticed he wouldn't look at me directly. Before he left, he said something that I still hear in my nightmares. He said, "You're the 3rd person this winter who's come down from that canyon talking about the pale ones. The others don't go into the mountains anymore. You shouldn't either." I drove straight home, 16 hours without stopping. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. The thing that makes me check my locks 3 times before bed and sleep with every light in my apartment burning. 2 weeks after I got back, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was my camera, the one I'd dropped in the clearing. The memory card was still in it. There was only one photo on it, one that I didn't take. It was a close-up of me sleeping in my tent that first night, before everything went wrong. The angle suggested it had been taken from about 2 feet away, and in the reflection of my tent's fabric, barely visible in the darkness, you could see a face, pale, smiling, watching. I haven't been back to West Virginia. I don't take wilderness photos anymore, but sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I hear it again. That humming, and I know, with absolute certainty, that whatever I saw in Smokehole Canyon is still there, still waiting, still watching, and one day, it might decide to come looking for me. The old-timers in Cherokee, North Carolina, will tell you that some places in the Smoky Mountains have been wrong since before the Trail of Tears, since before the first European ever set foot on this land, and if you're smart, you'll listen to them because I didn't. And now I know exactly what kind of wrong they were talking about. It was January, one of those cruel winter weeks where the temperature drops so low that your breath crystallizes in your lungs. I was a grad student then, studying Appalachian folklore for my thesis, spending my winter break interviewing elders about local legends. An old woman named Ruth, who claimed to be 103 years old and looked every day of it, told me about Screaming Ridge. They say, if you go there at night, she whispered, her voice like dead leaves scraping stone, you'll hear them. The ones who went feral after they lost their families on the removal. They never came back down. I should have known better. I was 24 and arrogant and thought folklore was just stories people told to explain things they didn't understand. So I took my recorder and my camping gear and I hiked up to that ridge, determined to prove there was nothing up there but wind and wildlife. The trail was marked on old maps, but hadn't been maintained in decades. Snow covered everything, turning the forest into something pristine and alien. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun was setting and the temperature was dropping fast. I set up my tent in a small clearing, made a fire, and settled in to record ambient sounds. For the first few hours, everything was normal. Wind through bare branches, the occasional crack of ice on tree limbs, the whisper-soft fall of snow. Then, around midnight, the temperature plummeted another 10 degrees and the wind died completely. The silence was so total it felt like being wrapped in wool. That's when the screaming started. It wasn't one voice. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, rising and falling in waves that rolled across the mountain like thunder. They weren't quite human, these screams. They had the timbre of human vocal cords, but the cadence was wrong, too high-pitched, too sustained. As if whatever was making them didn't need to breathe. They were coming from all around me, echoing off the ridges, bouncing back and forth until I couldn't tell direction anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled out of my tent, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The beam caught. Movement in the trees. Figures, dozens of them, moving through the forest in absolute silence despite the deep snow. They were barefoot, dressed in rags that might have once been clothes, but were now just strips of rotted fabric hanging from skeletal frames. Their skin was the gray-white of corpses, and their hair hung in long, matted tangles. But it was their eyes that paralyzed me. They reflected my flashlight like an animal's, glowing yellow-green in the darkness, and they were all fixed on me. The screaming stopped. The silence that followed was worse. They began to move toward me, not running but walking with a strange, loping gait that ate up the distance faster than should have been possible. I could see their faces now, gaunt and hollow-cheeked, mouths open in screams they were no longer making. Their fingers were too long, ending in nails that had grown into claws, black with what I hoped was dirt but suspected was old blood. I ran back to my tent, grabbed my pack, and fled down the mountain. I didn't follow the trail. I couldn't see it anyway in the darkness. I just ran, crashing through underbrush, sliding down steep slopes, the screaming starting again behind me, all around me, inside my head. I fell more times than I could count, each time certain that cold hands would close around my ankles and drag me back up the mountain. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. Long enough for the sky to start lightening with false dawn, long enough for my lungs to feel like they were full of broken glass. I finally collapsed at the base of the mountain, on a Forest Service road, and lay there gasping and crying until a park ranger found me. I tried to tell him what I'd seen, but he just nodded slowly, like he'd heard it all before. "You went to Screaming Ridge," he said. It wasn't a question. "You're lucky you made it down. Most people who go up there in winter don't." He drove me back to town, and I never finished my thesis. I left North Carolina the next day and haven't been back. But sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind is still, I hear them again, the screaming, and I know they're still up there on that ridge, still waiting, still hungry. The ones who went feral, the ones who never came back down. Ruth was right. Some places in these mountains have been wrong for a very long time. There's a cave on Roan Mountain, somewhere between Tennessee and North Carolina, that isn't on any map, and there's a good reason for that. A reason I learned the hard way when I was 22 and stupid enough to think I could handle anything. These mountains threw at me. I was doing what I thought was extreme spelunking, exploring unmapped cave systems for a documentary I was sure would make me famous. My climbing partner, Marcus, and I had heard rumors from locals about a massive cave complex on Roan Mountain's north face, one that supposedly went down hundreds of feet and connected to other caves throughout the range. The locals wouldn't tell us where it was. They'd just shake their heads and change the subject, which naturally made us more determined to find it. We found the entrance in late December, hidden behind a waterfall that had frozen into a curtain of ice. It took us 3 hours to chip through, enough ice to squeeze inside. The cave mouth was larger than we'd expected, big enough to stand upright, and it angled down steeply into darkness that seemed to absorb our headlamps. The temperature inside was warmer than outside, which should have been our first warning. Caves are supposed to stay cool year-round. We descended for what felt like hours, following a passage that twisted and turned like intestines. The walls were covered in scratches, thousands of them, overlapping and crossing, as if something had been clawing at the stone for years. Marcus thought they were from bears. I wasn't so sure. They were too regular, too deliberate. About 200 feet down, we found the first chamber. It was huge, cathedral-sized, stalactites hanging from the ceiling like teeth. But what stopped us cold were the bones. They were everywhere, piled in mounds against the walls, scattered across the floor, hanging from rock formations where they'd been deliberately placed. Deer, bear, smaller animals I couldn't identify, and human. There were definitely human bones in those piles. Skulls with the tops cracked open, femurs snapped in half for the marrow. "We should go back," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. But I was looking at the far side of the chamber, where another passage led deeper into the mountain. I could feel air moving from that direction, warm and fetid, carrying a smell that made my stomach turn. Meat left too long in the sun. Infection, death, that's when we heard it. Movement in the darkness beyond our lights, the scrape of something on stone, the wet sound of breathing. Multiple somethings, multiple breathers. I turned my headlamp toward the sound and immediately wished I hadn't. Eyes reflected back at me. Dozens of pairs, at various heights, as if they belonged to things that were standing, crouching, crawling. They didn't blink. They just watched us with an intelligence that was somehow worse than any animal's. Then they moved into the light. And I understood why the locals wouldn't talk about this place. They had been human once. You could tell from the basic shape, the proportions. But whatever they were now, they'd left humanity behind a long time ago. Their skin was pale to the point of translucence, pulled tight over bones that jutted at wrong angles. They moved on all fours, their spines curved in ways that suggested they'd forgotten how to stand upright. Their faces were elongated, jaws distended, teeth filed or worn down to points, and they were smiling at us. Marcus broke first. He turned and ran, and I was right behind him, our footsteps echoing off the cave walls as we scrambled back up the passage. Behind us, I could hear them following, not running, but moving with a horrible, efficient crawl that was somehow faster than our panicked flight. They were making sounds now, not quite words, but close, syllables that might have been language once, corrupted and broken. We made it maybe halfway back to the entrance when Marcus fell. His headlamp shattered, plunging him into darkness, and I heard him scream as they caught up to him. I should have gone back. I should have tried to help, but I didn't. I kept running, kept climbing, even as his screams turned into something worse than screams, into a wet gurgling that cut off abruptly and left only the sound of feeding in the darkness behind me. I broke through the ice curtain just as dawn was breaking. I slid down the mountain face, not stopping until I reached my truck. I drove to the nearest sheriff's office and tried to tell them what happened, tried to explain about Marcus and the things in the cave. They found the cave entrance eventually, but it had collapsed. The whole cliff face had come down, sealing it shut. They said it must have been unstable, that the ice melt probably triggered it. They never found Marcus's body. I know better. I know that collapse wasn't an accident. I think they brought it down themselves, sealing themselves back in, protecting their home from the outside world. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Marcus is still down there. I wonder if he's become one of them. I wonder if he's smiling in the darkness, waiting for the day when someone else finds that cave and decides to explore it. There's a network of caves on Roan Mountain that the local guides won't take you to. And when I asked why during my 2019 spelunking expedition, an old man named Vernon just looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and said, because the ones who live there don't just hunt you, they study you first. I was 28 and had explored cave systems across 3 continents. I'd crawled through passages so tight I had to exhale to fit through, descended into chambers 1,000 feet below the Earth's surface, and I'd never once felt afraid. Fear was for amateurs. So when my climbing partner David and I found the entrance to the Roan Mountain complex in late January, hidden behind a frozen waterfall, I didn't hesitate. Vernon's warning felt like the superstition of an old man who'd never left his town. The cave entrance was wider than most, almost inviting. And the first 100 yards were textbook limestone formations, stable floor, good airflow. Then we found the first marker. It was a cairn, carefully stacked stones, about 3 feet high. and hanging from the top was what looked like a doll made from sticks and dried grass, bound together with what I initially thought was twine. David touched it and immediately jerked. His hand backed. "That's hair," he said, his voice tight. "Human hair." We should have turned back, but the passage beyond the cairn opened into a cathedral-sized chamber, and when we shined our lights across it, we both stopped breathing. The walls were covered in symbols, thousands of them carved deep into the stone. Not primitive scratches. These were deliberate, repeating patterns, mathematical in their precision, and they were recent. You could tell from the fresh tool marks, the lack of mineral deposits in the grooves. "Someone's been living here," David whispered. "Recently." That's when we noticed the floor. It was covered in paths, worn roots through the cave, polished smooth by countless feet over years, maybe decades. And along these paths, spaced at regular intervals, were more cairns, dozens of them, each one topped with those stick dolls, each one different in size and construction. They were watching the paths, marking territory. The temperature dropped, suddenly, and I heard David's sharp intake of breath. "Look at this." He was crouched near one of the paths, his light focused on a section of floor I'd almost stepped on. It was covered in loose rocks, carefully arranged to look natural, but when he brushed one aside, we saw the pit beneath. 6 feet deep, maybe more, the bottom lined with sharpened sticks that had been fire-hardened to points. It was a Punjab trap, the kind military forces used in Vietnam. Sophisticated, deliberate, designed to maim, not kill instantly. We started, backing toward the entrance, moving carefully now, checking every step. That's when David's light caught something on the far wall. Equipment. Modern equipment. Backpacks, ropes, climbing gear, all neatly arranged on natural stone shelves like a museum display. There must have been 30 or 40 sets. Some of the packs had dates on them. The oldest I could see was from 1997. The newest was from 3 months ago. "They collect them," David said, and I could hear the tremor in his voice. "They take them from the people who come here." I was about to respond when I heard it. Not footsteps, but something else. A clicking sound, rhythmic and deliberate, echoing from multiple directions. Not random cave noise. This was communication. They were talking to each other. About us. We ran. Not toward the entrance we'd come through. The clicking sounds were concentrated there. David spotted a smaller passage to our right, and we dove into it, crawling on our hands and knees through a tunnel barely 2 feet high. Behind us, the clicking grew louder, faster, more excited. They were coming. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, and we saw them. Not the pale, primitive creatures from horror movies. These were different. They were short, maybe 5 feet tall, with broad shoulders and powerful builds adapted for life underground. Their skin was gray, mottled like stone, perfect camouflage in the cave environment. Their eyes were enormous, reflecting our lights with that distinctive eyeshine of animals adapted to darkness. But it was their hands that terrified me long. Dexterous fingers covered in calluses, holding tools. Actual tools. Knives fashioned from stone, lengths of rope made from plant fibers, even what looked like a crude bow. There were 7 of them, and they were positioned strategically around the chamber's exits. This wasn't a random encounter. They'd herded us here, driven us exactly where they wanted us. One of them stepped forward larger than the others, with scarring across its face in deliberate patterns. It looked at us with unmistakable intelligence, then made a gesture with its hand. Universal. Simple. Sit down, David bolted. Chose the wrong exit. I heard him scream as the floor gave way beneath him. Another trap. This one we hadn't seen. But scream cut off with a wet, crunching sound that I still hear in my nightmares. The leader looked at me, then at the pit, then back at me. The message was clear. Run and die quickly, or cooperate and maybe survive. I sat down, shaking so hard my headlamp beam was vibrating. The leader approached, slowly, deliberately, non-threatening. Up close, I could see the intelligence in those huge eyes. This wasn't an animal. This was a person, or had been, once, before generations of living in darkness had changed them into something else. It reached out and touched my headlamp, fascinated, then carefully, so carefully removed it from my head. Not aggressive. Curious, it examined the lamp for a long moment, then looked back at me. And I swear to God, it smiled. Not the terrifying grimace of a monster, but the genuine smile of someone who'd just figured out how something worked. It made that clicking sound again, softer now, and the others approached. They surrounded me, and I prepared to die, but they didn't attack. They searched me, methodically, professionally, like TSA agents. They took my rope, my carabiners, my knife, my phone, though the phone clearly confused them. They left me my water and some food. Then the leader pointed to a corner of the chamber where I saw something that made my blood run cold. A bedroll, supplies, a space that had clearly been occupied by another person. Recently, they weren't going to kill me. Not yet. They were going to keep me, study me, learn from me, however long that took. I waited, hours, maybe. Long enough for them to settle into whatever routine they had, to stop paying close attention. Then I moved, not toward any of the obvious exits those would be trapped. Instead, I went for a crack in the wall I'd noticed earlier, barely wide enough for a person that seemed to let in the faintest draft of outside air. I squeezed into it before they could react, wedging myself into stone, pushing forward even as I heard them scrambling after me. They're clicking, urgent now, angry. The crack got narrower. So near I had to dislocate my shoulder to keep moving, biting down on my jacket to keep from screaming. But it led somewhere I could feel the air getting fresher, colder. I pushed until I couldn't push anymore, until my body was completely wedged and I thought I would die there, stuck in stone. Then something gave, and I was falling, tumbling down a scree slope on the outside of the mountain, rolling through snow and rocks until I slammed into a tree and everything went black. Hiker found me 2 days later, delirious and hypothermic. My shoulder was permanently damaged. I can't raise my left arm above my head anymore. The authorities found the cave entrance eventually, but it had collapsed. Unstable mountain, they said. Lucky you got out. They never found David's body. They never found the equipment displays or the traps or any evidence of the trap makers. But I know they're still there. Still waiting. Still learning. And sometimes I wonder what they learned from me. What tools they fashioned from my equipment. What traps they've designed with the knowledge they gained. And I wonder if the next person who finds that cave will be met with something even more sophisticated than what I faced. Because that's what makes them truly terrifying. They don't just hunt. They evolve. I was part of a search and rescue team that operated out of Linville Gorge in North Carolina for 7 years. And in that time I saw things that made me question whether we were really alone in those mountains. But nothing prepared me for what we found during the January search for the Henderson family. Nothing could have prepared me for that. The Hendersons, James and Maria and their 12-year-old daughter Emma had gone hiking on one of the Gorge trails on a Friday in early January. When they didn't show up for work on Monday, Maria's sister called it in. We mobilized immediately. Linville Gorge is called the Grand Canyon of the East for a reason. It's rugged, dangerous, with cliffs dropping 1,000 feet to the river below. People die there regularly, usually from falls or exposure. We found their car at the trailhead, but the trail itself was a mess. January had been brutal that year, with ice storms every few days, coating everything in a layer of frozen rain that made the rocks treacherous. We followed the main trail for about 3 miles before we found the first sign of them. James's backpack, discarded next to the trail. Its contents scattered across the frozen ground, as if he'd just dumped everything out in a panic. That's when we found the tracks. They led off the main trail, down into a ravine that wasn't part of any mapped hiking route. 3 sets of tracks, 2 adults and a child, but they were wrong. The stride length was too long, like they'd been running, and there were other tracks. Alongside them, dozens of them, barefoot impressions in the ice-crusted mud that looked almost human but not quite. The toes were too long, splayed out for grip, and they were on both sides of the Henderson family's tracks, as if they'd been herded. We followed the tracks for 2 hours, down into the gorge where the cliffs rose up on both sides, and the river crashed over rocks far below. The ravine got narrower and narrower until we were walking single file, and that's where we found Maria. She was wedged in a crevice between 2 boulders, and she'd been there for days. She was still alive, barely. Her lips blue with hypothermia, her eyes wide and unseeing. When we pulled her out, she started screaming. She screamed until her voice gave out. And then she just made these awful croaking sounds, pointing back the way we'd come, shaking her head violently. One of our team medics managed to calm her down, enough to ask what happened. She couldn't speak, but she could write, her hand shaking so badly the words were barely legible. They took them. They took James and Emma. The pale ones. They came from the rocks. So many of them. We got Maria to the hospital, then went back with a larger team, police, park rangers, dogs. We searched that ravine for 3 days. We found James on the 2nd day, at the bottom of the gorge, on a narrow strip of beach, beside the river. His body was in pieces, scattered across the rocks, and the pieces had been arranged in a pattern, a circle with his head at the center. The coroner said he'd died from blood loss, that he'd been alive when they started cutting him apart. We never found Emma. We found her jacket, torn to shreds and left hanging from a tree branch about a mile from where we found James. We found one of her boots in the river, but we never found her body. The search went on for 2 weeks, then a month, then quietly shut down. Maria never recovered. She's in a psychiatric facility now, still writing those same words over and over. The pale ones took her. They took my baby. I quit search and rescue after that. I couldn't go back into those mountains, couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched every time we searched that ravine. Other team members said the same thing. They'd see movement in the rocks, catch glimpses of pale figures watching from the cliff tops. The dogs refused to track beyond a certain point, would just sit down and howl. The official report says the Hendersons got lost, that James fell and died from his injuries, that Emma probably fell into the river and was washed away. But I know. Different. I saw those tracks. I saw the pattern James's body parts made on the beach, and I saw Maria's eyes, the absolute terror that will never leave them. Something lives in Linville Gorge. Something that doesn't want to be found but won't let people just walk through its territory. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Emma is still alive down there, if she's become one of them. I wonder if her mother wonders the same thing. There's a hollow on Pine Mountain in eastern Kentucky where the fog never lifts, where the trees grow so thick that GPS fails and compasses spin aimlessly, and where my brother disappeared 15 years ago on a hunting trip that was supposed to last 3 days. And I'm telling this story now because I finally went back. And I found something that makes me wish I hadn't. My brother Jake was 24 when he vanished. He was an experienced hunter, grew up in these mountains, knew them like his own backyard. When he didn't come back from that trip, we organized a massive search. Park rangers, volunteers, tracking dogs, helicopters, everything. We searched for 6 weeks, found nothing. Not his camp, not his gear, not a single trace. It was like the mountain had swallowed him whole. I was 19 then, and convinced myself that he'd had an accident, fallen into some hidden ravine, died quickly. It was better than the alternative, than thinking about what might have actually happened. But as the years passed, I heard stories. Locals who'd lived around Pine Mountain their whole lives would talk, after a few drinks, about the hollow where Jake disappeared. They called it the Witch's Bowl. Said things lived there that used to be people. Said the hollow was cursed. Had been since the coal mine collapse of 1902 that trapped 63 men underground. This past December, I went back. I'd tried to move on, built a life in Cincinnati, got married, had a kid. But Jake haunted me. I needed to know what happened to him. I needed closure. So I lied to my wife about a business trip and drove to Kentucky with camping gear and enough supplies for a week. I was going to search that hollow properly, with modern equipment, with a satellite phone that actually worked. The hollow was worse than I remembered. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. It wasn't normal fog. It was oily, almost tangible, clinging to my skin and clothes with a smell like sulfur and rotting vegetation. The trees were dead, every single one of them, standing like skeletal fingers reaching for a sky they'd never touch again. And it was silent. No birds, no insects, no sound except my own breathing and the occasional drip of moisture from the dead branches. I found the first marker about 2 hours in. It was a pile of stones, stacked in a cairn about 4 feet high, and scratched into the topmost stone was a message: "Turn back." The handwriting was crude, done with a sharp rock or a knife. I almost did turn back. Almost, but then I saw another cairn, about 50 yards deeper into the hollow, and another beyond that. They formed a trail, leading me deeper into the fog. The 10th cairn had something hanging from it, a piece of fabric, faded orange, the same color as the hunting jacket Jake had been wearing when he disappeared. My hands were shaking as I touched it. It was real. He'd been here. Maybe he'd made these cairns. Maybe he was trying to mark a trail out. I followed them with renewed determination, deeper into the hollow, until I reached a clearing that shouldn't have existed. It was perfectly circular, about 30 yards across, and the ground was covered in bones. Animal bones mostly. Deer, bear, smaller creatures. But there were human bones too. Dozens of them. Skulls arranged in neat rows. Femurs and rib cages sorted by size. And in the center of the clearing was a structure built from mud and sticks and what looked like human hair woven into rope. It was a dwelling of some kind, low and dark, with an entrance just big enough for a person to crawl through. That's when I heard the sound, a wet, labored breathing coming from inside the structure, and a voice, cracked and broken, barely human. Run. Just that one word, over and over. Run, 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 run. I knew that voice. I'd know it anywhere, even destroyed. Like this, it was Jake. I dropped to my knees and crawled toward the entrance, calling his name. The voice stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then something emerged from the darkness inside. It had been human once. I could see that in the basic shape, in the eyes that looked at me with recognition, but 15 years in that hollow had changed it. Changed him. His skin was pale and loose, hanging off bones that had warped and elongated. His hair had grown down to his waist, matted with mud and things I didn't want to identify. His fingers and toes had grown into claws, black with dirt and old blood. He was naked except for scraps of that orange jacket still clinging to his skeletal frame. "Jake?" I whispered. He looked at me with those eyes, and I saw recognition there, and something else. Pain, shame, horror at what he'd become. He opened. His mouth and his teeth had been filed down to points, and when he spoke, his voice was the sound of dead leaves scraping stone. Not Jake anymore. Run. They come. They always come. That's when I heard them. Movement in the fog all around the clearing. Footsteps that didn't quite sound like footsteps. Breathing that was too wet, too labored. They emerged from the mist like ghosts, dozens of them, things that had once been people. They moved on all fours, their spines twisted, their faces elongated, and they were all staring at me with the same expression my brother wore. Hunger, madness, despair. I ran. My brother, the thing my brother had become, didn't follow. None of them did. They just watched me go, and I could hear them calling after me in voices that almost sounded human. "Come back. Stay. Join us." I crashed through the fog, past the cairns, past the dead trees, until I broke out of the hollow and collapsed on solid ground, gasping and sobbing. I haven't told anyone what I found. How could I? My wife thinks I've been acting strange since my business trip. She's not wrong. I can't sleep without seeing my brother's face, can't close my eyes without hearing his voice telling me to run. And sometimes I wonder if I should have stayed. I wonder if that's what the hollow does, if it changes you slowly, if Jake is waiting for me to come back, waiting for his little brother to join him in whatever hell that place has become. Part of me wants to, God help me, part of me wants to go back. I worked as a snowplow driver for the Virginia Department of Transportation for 12 years. Clearing mountain roads during winter storms. And in all that time I learned one thing with absolute certainty. There are things in these mountains that don't show up in the daytime, things that wait for the snow to fall and the sun to set. And I encountered one of them on a February night on Route 56 near Montebello. And I quit my job the very next day. It was 2 a.m., and I was halfway through my shift, clearing a section of road that winds through George Washington National Forest. The snow was coming down hard, one of those blizzards where your windshield wipers can barely keep up and your headlights just illuminate a wall of white. Visibility was maybe 20 feet. I was going slow, blade down, pushing snow off the road. In a steady rhythm I'd perfected over years of doing this work. That's when I saw it standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, and the plow slid a good 10 feet before stopping, but I stopped in time. It didn't move, just stood there in my headlights, and I sat there staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. At first I thought it was a person, maybe someone whose car had broken down, standing in the road trying to flag me down. But the proportions were wrong. It was too tall, at least 7 feet, and too thin, like someone had taken a human body and stretched it on. The racket was naked, completely naked in a blizzard, and its skin was the blue white of a corpse that had been frozen solid. But it wasn't frozen. It was moving, swaying slightly, as if to music only it could hear. I hit the horn, a long blast that echoed off the mountains. The thing turned its head toward me, and I got my first good look at its face. God, I wish I hadn't. It had eyes, but they were completely white. No pupils, no iris. Just milky white orbs that somehow still managed to focus on me with absolute precision. Its mouth was open, hanging slack, and I could see rows of teeth inside. Too many teeth, all different sizes, as if it had collected them from different sources and jammed them into its gums. It started walking toward the plow. Not walking, actually. It was more like gliding, its feet barely touching the snow, leaving no footprints. And it was smiling at me. That terrible, stretched mouth was pulling up at the corners in something approximating a smile, and I could see its tongue, black and too long, lolling between those mismatched teeth. I threw the plow into reverse and started backing up, my eyes locked on the thing as it kept coming, faster now, closing the distance between us. I could see its hands, fingers like twigs, ending in nails that curved into talons. It raised one hand and pressed it against the front of the plow, and I heard metal groan, saw the blade begin to bend under the pressure of those fingers. I spun the wheel and managed to turn the plow around, dropped it into drive, and floored it. The engine roared, wheels spinning on ice before catching, and I was moving, accelerating down the mountain road in a blizzard. Going way too fast, not caring because I needed to get away from that thing. I looked in my side mirror and saw it. Standing in the road behind me, still smiling, still watching me go. Then the snow swallowed it, and it was gone. I made it back to the depot and told my supervisor I was done for the night. Wasn't feeling well. He took one look at my face and didn't argue. I went home, poured 3 fingers of whiskey, and sat at my kitchen table until the sun came up. I kept telling myself it was exhaustion, that I'd been seeing things, that the snow and the darkness had played tricks on my mind. I almost convinced myself. The next morning, I got a call from my supervisor. "Did you hit something last night?" he asked. "Front blade on your plow is damaged. Looks like it got crushed by something heavy." I drove down to the depot and looked at the plow. He was right. The blade was bent inward, and there were impressions in the metal. 5 long grooves where something had gripped it and squeezed. The grooves were too far apart to be human fingers. They were too deep to have been made by anything natural. I quit that afternoon. Didn't give 2 weeks' notice. Didn't explain. Just turned in my keys and walked away. My supervisor tried to talk me out of it, said I was one of his best drivers, said winter was their busiest season. I told him he could find someone else to clear Route 56. I wasn't going back up there. Not in winter, not at night, not ever. I work in an office now, 9 to 5, never have to leave the city. I don't drive mountain roads anymore. Don't go into the mountains at all if I can help it. And whenever it snows, whenever I see those fat flakes falling in the streetlight outside my window, I think about that thing standing in the road. I think about that smile, and I wonder how many other plow drivers have seen it over the years. I wonder how many of them are still driving those roads at night, still clearing snow in the darkness, still waiting for the moment when they see something standing in their headlights that shouldn't exist, but does. And I wonder if they'll be smart enough to run like I did, or if they'll try to understand what they're seeing, and if that curiosity will be the last mistake they ever make. Because I'm absolutely certain of one thing. That thing is still out. There, still waiting in the snow on dark winter nights, still watching for headlights on that lonely mountain road, And one of these nights, someone won't drive away fast enough. Someone will hesitate, and that hesitation will cost them everything. I inherited my grandfather's cabin on Spruce Knob when I was 26, along with a letter that said, in his spidery handwriting, "Don't go there in winter, and if you do, never go alone." I thought he was being dramatic, the way old people sometimes are about places they knew as children, but I was wrong about that, like I was wrong about so many things before. I spent 3 days in that cabin in February. The cabin sits at 4,863 feet, the highest point in West Virginia, surrounded by red spruce forests so dense the sunlight barely reaches the ground even in summer. In winter, it's like being on another planet. The snow gets deep enough to bury cars. The wind screams through the trees with a sound like voices, and the isolation is absolute. The nearest neighbor is 12 miles away, down a road that becomes impassable the moment the first serious snow falls. I went up there in early February with my girlfriend Sarah. Despite my grandfather's warning, despite the forecast calling for a major winter storm, we thought we were prepared. We had food, firewood, a generator, satellite phone. We had each other. What we didn't have was any understanding of what lived in those woods, of what my grandfather had been trying to protect me from. The first night was fine. We made dinner, played cards, watched the snow fall through the windows in thick, heavy flakes that seemed to absorb all sound from the outside world. By morning, we were snowed in completely. The drifts had piled up against the doors and windows, turning the cabin into a tomb. We didn't worry. We had supplies. The storm would pass. We'd dig out and drive back down the mountain. The second night, things changed. Sarah woke me around 2 a.m., gripping my arm so hard it left bruises. "Someone's outside," she whispered. I listened and heard it too. Footsteps crunching through the snow, circling the cabin. Slow, deliberate steps, as if whoever was out there was examining the building, looking for a way in. I grabbed my grandfather's old rifle from above the fireplace and called out, asking who was there. The footsteps stopped. For maybe 5 minutes, there was absolute silence. Then we heard them again, but now they were coming from all sides. Multiple sets of footsteps, all circling, all perfectly synchronized. I moved to the window and wiped away the condensation, pressing my face against the cold glass. What I saw made my blood freeze solid in my veins. There were 6 of them that I could see, maybe more in the shadows beyond the tree line. They looked like people, but the way they moved was all wrong. They walked hunched over, arms hanging too long, almost reaching their knees. They were naked, completely naked in weather cold enough to kill a person in minutes, and their skin was the blue-white of frostbite. But they weren't frozen. They were moving with perfect coordination, taking turns approaching the cabin, pressing their faces against the windows, peering inside with eyes that reflected the lamplight like mirrors. One of them locked eyes with me. Its face was human enough to be recognizable but wrong in every detail. The nose was too flat, the mouth too wide, the eyes set too far apart, and it was smiling. Not a happy smile. Not even a cruel smile. It was the smile of something that didn't quite understand what smiling meant, but was mimicking it anyway. Then it raised one hand and pressed it against the glass, and I could see that its fingers had extra joints, could bend in ways human fingers shouldn't. They stayed there all night, taking turns at the windows, pressing their faces against the glass, breathing fog patterns that lingered long after they moved away. Sometimes they would scratch at the wood siding with nails that sounded like they were made of stone, Sometimes they would make noises, attempts at speech that came out as guttural clicks and groans. They never tried to break in. They just watched. Waited when dawn broke. They were gone. No footprints in the snow except for the circles they'd worn around the cabin. No sign they'd ever been there except for the handprints on the windows, pressed so hard into the glass that they'd left cracks. We packed immediately, didn't even bother with most of our gear. We just needed to get out. It took us 6 hours too. Dig out the front door and shovel a path to the car. The whole time, I felt eyes on us from the tree line. We drove down the mountain in silence, neither of us willing to talk about what we'd seen until we were safely back in town. Sarah left me 2 weeks later. Said she couldn't be with someone who'd taken her to that place. I don't blame her. I sold the cabin without ever going back. Let the real estate agent deal with it. Told him to burn it down for all I cared. But sometimes I wonder about my grandfather, about all the winters he spent up there alone. I wonder if he saw them too. I wonder if that's why he never went in winter. Or maybe he did go, and maybe he made some kind of arrangement with them, and maybe that's why they didn't try to break in. Maybe they were just reminding me that the cabin, the mountain, all of it belonged to them first, and they were letting me know I wasn't welcome. I inherited my grandfather's cabin on Spruce Knob when I was 26, along with a letter that said, in his spidery handwriting, "Don't go there in winter, and if you do, never go alone." I thought he was being dramatic, the way old people sometimes are about places they knew as children, but I was wrong about that, like I was wrong about so many things before. I spent 3 days in that cabin in February. The cabin sits at 4,863 feet, the highest point in West Virginia, surrounded by red spruce forests so dense the sunlight barely reaches the ground even in summer. In winter, it's like being on another planet. The snow gets deep enough to bury cars. The wind screams through the trees with a sound like voices, and the isolation is absolute. The nearest neighbor is 12 miles away, down a road that becomes impassable the moment the first serious snow falls. I went up there in early February with my girlfriend Sarah. Despite my grandfather's warning, despite the forecast calling for a major winter storm, we thought we were prepared. We had food, firewood, a generator, satellite phone. We had each other. What we didn't have was any understanding of what lived in those woods, of what my grandfather had been trying to protect me from. The first night was fine. We made dinner, played cards, watched the snow fall through the windows in thick, heavy flakes that seemed to absorb all sound from the outside world. By morning, we were snowed in completely. The drifts had piled up against the doors and windows, turning the cabin into a tomb. We didn't worry. We had supplies. The storm would pass. We'd dig out and drive back down the mountain. The second night, things changed. Sarah woke me around 2 a.m., gripping my arm so hard it left bruises. "Someone's outside," she whispered. I listened and heard it too. Footsteps crunching through the snow, circling the cabin. Slow, deliberate steps, as if whoever was out there was examining the building, looking for a way in. I grabbed my grandfather's old rifle from above the fireplace and called out, asking who was there. The footsteps stopped. For maybe 5 minutes, there was absolute silence. Then we heard them again, but now they were coming from all sides. Multiple sets of footsteps, all circling, all perfectly synchronized. I moved to the window and wiped away the condensation, pressing my face against the cold glass. What I saw made my blood freeze solid in my veins. There were 6 of them that I could see, maybe more in the shadows beyond the tree line. They looked like people, but the way they moved was all wrong. They walked hunched over, arms hanging too long, almost reaching their knees. They were naked, completely naked in weather cold enough to kill a person in minutes, and their skin was the blue-white of frostbite. But they weren't frozen. They were moving with perfect coordination, taking turns approaching the cabin, pressing their faces against the windows, peering inside with eyes that reflected the lamplight like mirrors. One of them locked eyes with me. Its face was human enough to be recognizable but wrong in every detail. The nose was too flat, the mouth too wide, the eyes set too far apart, and it was smiling. Not a happy smile. Not even a cruel smile. It was the smile of something that didn't quite understand what smiling meant, but was mimicking it anyway. Then it raised one hand and pressed it against the glass, and I could see that its fingers had extra joints, could bend in ways human fingers shouldn't. They stayed there all night, taking turns at the windows, pressing their faces against the glass, breathing fog patterns that lingered long after they moved away. Sometimes they would scratch at the wood siding with nails that sounded like they were made of stone. Sometimes they would make noises, attempts at speech that came out as guttural clicks and groans. They never tried to break in. They just watched. Waited when dawn broke. They were gone. No footprints in the snow except for the circles they'd worn around the cabin. No sign they'd ever been there except for the handprints on the windows, pressed so hard into the glass that they'd left cracks. We packed immediately, didn't even bother with most of our gear. We just needed to get out. It took us 6 hours too. Dig out the front door and shovel a path to the car. The whole time, I felt eyes on us from the tree line. We drove down the mountain in silence, neither of us willing to talk about what we'd seen until we were safely back in town. Sarah left me 2 weeks later. Said she couldn't be with someone who'd taken her to that place. I don't blame her. I sold the cabin without ever going back. Let the real estate agent deal with it. Told him to burn it down for all I cared. But sometimes I wonder about my grandfather, about all the winters he spent up there alone. I wonder if he saw them too. I wonder if that's why he never went in winter. Or maybe he did go, and maybe he made some kind of arrangement with them, and maybe that's why they didn't try to break in. Maybe they were just reminding me that the cabin, the mountain, all of it belonged to them first, and they were letting me know I wasn't welcome.